Hello, everybody. I'm Robert Franz, music director of the Windsor Symphony Orchestra, and I am delighted to be sitting down and having a conversation with the extraordinary violinist, Blake Pouliot. Blake, welcome to the Windsor Symphony.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we are really excited to have you join us for our opening night concerts where you're performing Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto, probably one of the most famous violin concertos in all of the repertoire. Can you take us a little bit into that concerto, what that concerto means to you and what preparing it is like and what our audience can expect?
Yeah, of course. So, like you said, Mendelssohn Violin Concerto is definitely one of the most famous violin concertos, and I think for anyone who's kind of a classical enthusiast, it's definitely one of the most famous classical pieces I think of all time too. It's a very interesting piece to kind of revisit and experience throughout your career because it's something that I think almost I would say almost every violinist who becomes a professional, whether they're in the Windsor Symphony, whether in another orchestra in the world, whether they're a soloist, a chamber musician, uh, I would probably argue that every single one has either learned the violin concerto of Mendelssohn or performed it or studied it. It's just kind of I feel like it's unanimously understood that that's something that you learn, and I think it's also something that we as violinists fall in love with very quickly when we discover that it's something we want to do. It's just you can't not like it. It has three movements of absolutely beautiful melodies, and even from the time that the piece was first premiered. It was popular. After its first premiere, it was already known as something very exciting, and crowds immediately loved it. And then it was something through the lineage of time that's kind of just withstood it. It's always been popular and it's been played kind of forever and really kind of deemed the young person's violin concerto. It's something that I think all of us have to champion. So I think for me personally, it's something that I have grown with, and it's kind of bloomed, developed, and adapted as I, as a person, have grown, bloomed, and adapted. It's something that I think I played as a youngster when I was in my adolescence, and then again revisited in post adolescence and college, and hopefully kind of gained a new tier and level of appreciation. And I think that as I continue to grow with this and perform it very frequently in my own career, it's something that I think, I experience differently, and I think and feel certain ways about each movement. And I think more importantly, despite how much I performed it and how much I play it, I always respect it because it's such a beautiful piece of music. It's so exciting to play and then embrace, and it's just a beautiful kind of dialogue between the conductor, violinist, and orchestra. And so I'm so thrilled that for the first time and to open the season, what better piece than have the Mendelssohn? So I can't wait.
Do you think that part of its success for violinists and for audiences was the relationship that Mendelssohn had with Ferdinand David, the concertmaster of the Gewandhaus Orchestra that he worked with as he was writing this concerto? I mean, seems to
Correct.
me there was a lot of back and forth between the two of them about what would work and what would work well.
Absolutely. I think that that's a huge part of it. I think that also Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto is, as for those who are classical trained, we understand that there's a segment of most concertos where we have kind of the orchestra fades out and the solo violinist will have kind of a time of virtuosity where they play alone called the cadenza. And Mendelssohn's was one of the first, if not the first, to actually pre-write the cadenza. Until up until that point, violinists really were kind of meant to improvise or kind of create something on the spot or create their own version that kind of most and best displayed their own virtuosity and kind of what they were best at. But Mendelssohn actually wrote this out, which was very unique for the time. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that he collaborated so closely with the concertmaster. But also, I think that having that close collaboration and just the melodies themselves, I think they speak so well independently that I think, yes, the close collaboration and making it something that was so accessible for a violinist to play. I mean, already it was deemed something incredibly virtuosic and difficult. But I think that working closely with a violinist made it something within the realm of violin playing, and that hasn't really changed. Whereas, when you get someone like, if you move on to the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, the Brahms Violin Concerto, these were just deemed unplayable, and so they had to work their way in to the repertoire and work their way into certain players who were able to champion them. But the Mendelssohn has always been difficult, but still within the means of violin playing. And so that's why I think it's just continuously successful. But also, we, as we kind of go through time, we learn more and more, and kind of dive deeper into the harmony and dive deeper into the actual orchestration and composition level of it. And it's just a masterwork.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
tell me, speaking of masterworks and masterpieces, are you still playing the Guarneri, the Del Gesù?
I am. Yes, I have been playing the Guarneri del Gesù that was made in 1729. I will have been playing it as of this fall, actually, right around the time that I come to play with Windsor Symphony. It will be exactly 9 years I'll have been playing on it.
That is extraordinary. So this violin that you're playing on is about 100 years older than the concerto that you're playing. So your violin is nearly 300 years old, which I think is just incredible.
Yeah.
But I heard a little birdie told me a story of how you got to play this instrument. I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about that competition you had to get in the room and choose this instrument.
Absolutely. Yeah. So originally, this instrument was owned and was kind of collected by the Canada Council for the Arts. So the Canada Council has this government program called the Musical Instrument Bank, which essentially they have a collection of multiple Stradivarius violins. They had this Guarneri del Gesù. And all of these instruments are owned, some by the council, but a lot by kind of individuals who kind of contribute them to this. And there's a competition on rotation, and every 3 years, you get to audition and apply. And if you get a rank, you get to pick one of the instruments. So they rank the winners between number 1 and, I would say, 12 or so, because I think there's about 12 violins, 12 to 15. And whenever your number is, that's kind of what number you are in line, to kind of go in and test all of them. And I was very fortunate that in 2015, I was the first choice. So I had my pick of the litter. And we're given a little bit of time beforehand to kind of test them all. And I kind of really honed in on this instrument. I had tried the Stradivarius and I didn't like them as much. And this one just kind of spoke to me, and it was just such a beautiful instrument. I just couldn't say no. So when I was super fortunate to get that rank, I picked that. And yeah, and then after 3 years, I did it again and was once again selected as their first choice. So I picked the same instrument, and then it's now kind of out of a private thing, and now it's kind of loaned to me independently, not part of the council.
Wow. What was specific, or what was it about the sound of the instrument that attracted you? What was it that we should be listening for when we hear you?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things and kind of the discrepancies between Guarneri and Stradivarius, for anyone who's not a violin geek, are kind of the creme de la creme of all violin makers. To this day, they still don't really know why they sound so superior. But I think that one thing that is really tangible, I mean, even someone who doesn't know instruments or isn't super familiar will understand, is that Stradivarius is particularly known for its upper register. I mean, the E string, and when I'm playing really high notes, it just sings and soars, and it has this beautiful kind of big sound. Whereas Guarneri has a beautiful upper register, but what it's really known for is the low register on the furthest string. When I'm playing a lot of these middle ranges, it just has a wide sound. It's a very thick, velvety, beautiful sound. And for me personally, I really kind of found that deep tone, almost like a richness to the sound, which I think envelops the space. And I think people will be able to really hear that the not only is the sound quality something that is just far superior and a beautiful, rich violin sound, but the actual projection of the instrument as well, the volume in which it's able, it's all acoustic. And nothing's mic'd, it's not amplified. And the way these instruments are actually able to carry such a large mass of sound into such a large room is amazing.
And is that how you manage to compete with a full orchestra when you're playing a concerto? I think for many of our audience members, when they see a violin soloist, they think, "Wow, that's That's a lot of sound to compete with, 40, 50, 60 people behind you.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is true. I mean, that's kind of one of the things that we study when I went to Los Angeles to study at the Colburn Conservatory down there with my old teacher and mentor Robert Lipsett. That was one of his most kind of particular methods of kind of studying, was that he taught us how to really build a projecting sound and the ability to actually have something that can compete with a full piece orchestra. And that's kind of part of the obstacle and part of the challenge of being a solo violinist. And I think that what makes these instruments, particularly mine, so successful is the fact that it actually does have the ability. Of course, it doesn't have it accessible right away. You're not it's not like it just makes sound all of a sudden. You really have to learn how to do that with technique and time and a lot of practice. But when you get it, you are actually able to achieve that, and because of that, it makes my day every day.
Well, I think you'll be really pleased when you get to our hall. We have a beautiful jewel box of a hall that seats 620 people only at the Capitol Theater, and it's the perfect size hall
Yeah.
for the orchestra and for concerti. Actually, it
Wow.
works really nicely.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard great things, and I mean, I love that size. I mean, it'll be perfect. I'm always happy to perform in a venue of that size. I mean, some of these other big things are just not really meant for something acoustic like what we do, and the intimacy of something of that size is absolutely perfect, and for the orchestra. So I really can't wait. It'll be amazing.
So, Blake, tell us a little bit about how you got started in the violin, why the violin, and how old were you, and how did it happen?
Yeah, so I started playing the violin when I was 7, which is to a lot of people actually would be really late, which is funny to think of. But most string players, I would say, start a little bit earlier, usually around 3 or 4. But I also am one of those people. I started actually on the piano when I was about 4 years old or 5, and I went to a Toronto Symphony concert with my parents, and I can't recall the pieces that were played. I can't recall. I think there was a violin soloist, but I went to hear the concert and apparently told my parents right afterwards. I said, the violin is the most beautiful thing I ever heard. And that was when I was about 5. And for 2 years, I asked my parents to play, and they said no. I was a really ambitious kid. I played hockey and soccer, and already played the piano, and so they thought, no, we don't want to, kind of spread them too thin with too many extracurricular things. But I picked up the violin and just kind of excelled extremely quickly. I think that I was always drawn to the human voice. I always liked singing. My parents actually worked in country music and television. My dad was a producer on this old Canadian variety show called the Tommy Hunter Show, which was a show on CBC. And so I was raised around music my whole life, but not really particularly classical. And I always liked singing and singers, and I thought that it was amazing. And in fact, at one point, I wanted to switch to cello because it was even more kind of vocal in its range. But I loved the repertoire that the violin had, and I found its ability to manipulate the sound just completely mystifying, and I was just enamored by its sheer ability and virtuosity. So I kind of stuck with it and went through it, and went through the Royal Conservatory in Toronto, and then eventually moved to California, and then kind of launched my career down here in the U.S.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So, my understanding is that your first time playing a concerto with an orchestra was when you were 11 years old. Is that correct?
Yes, it was 11 years old, and I actually played the other Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, which is the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto in D minor for string
Yeah.
orchestra.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if you could, what advice would you give to 11-year-old Blake?
Wow. I think I would say, uh, don't forget that your voice is special, and don't forget what makes you special. And I think you spend a lot of time, I think, trying to you know create a sound and a musical aesthetic that feels unique. And I think at certain points I've lost sight of that, trying to kind of emulate or do what I think is the correct version that people want from me. And I think I struggled with a bit with that when I was younger. And I think through all that, what I really kind of came to appreciate was what it means to actually have an earnest voice in music, and how important that is in really collaborating and being true to your own artistic vision.
I really appreciate that, and I definitely appreciate you saying that. A large We have a large youth and junior youth string ensembles, both
Ah,
of which will attend the Sunday afternoon performance of your Mendelssohn. And I think it's important when those kids are beginning and starting out and where they are to hear things like that from a person like you, so that they know that, like, what they're on the right track, and that there is a lot of potential, and you don't have to just fit into a cookie cutter, but you can just express yourself and
yes.
find your own path.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, it's all a balancing act. I mean, I think that there's obviously, something to be said. And I think it's valuable to challenge your own perspectives and want to improve, or, we can only, we lead by example. And so the fact that you want, or that one would want to change themselves in order to grow, is a great thing. But it's so easy to also lose sight of oneself and lose sight of kind of what it is that you actually are trying to achieve when you get so kind of overwhelmed with an oversaturation of other people's abilities and other people's potential and other people's sound. And I think that particularly for younger people, especially in this day and age where, I mean, I didn't have access to like the internet. I'm not even, I mean, I'm as close to Gen Z as you can get. And but even for me, like I didn't have connect on the computer as much as they have now, and I can't even imagine what it's like to have so many people kind of and other things. And when I was a kid, I still had, I would listen to violinists on CDs before, and then on YouTube a little bit, but that was how I heard a lot of the players that I liked. And so I think it's just important, yeah, like to hold on to why it is you're doing it, and feed that, and be comfortable with letting yourself embrace that.
Well, we are very much looking forward to embracing you as our soloist to open up our opening night concert for the Windsor Symphony Orchestra. Blake Pouliot, thank you so much for spending this time with me.
Oh, please, thank you for having me.